Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have an amazing interview for you with Steve Hall. He's the founder of Revive Stronger, an online coaching company for natural bodybuilders and people who want to improve their physique even if they don't compete. He's also a competitive natural bodybuilder and he has been competing since 2017. In 2021, just recently, he placed second at WNBF Worlds. He's been training for over a decade and is also the host of the Revive Stronger podcast, which I have been listening to for years. It's a great podcast providing evidence-based fitness and nutrition information, just like my own. Steve and I had an incredibly interesting and informative conversation on the fundamentals of a massing phase. You may also know massing phases by different terms, such as bulking phases or muscle building phases. So, if you want to set up a massing phase is in the most efficient way possible, don't miss out on these episodes. And with that said, let's get straight to the interview. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Nick. Yes, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. And we have a very interesting topic, which is massing phases or muscle building phases or bulking phases, depending on your preferred term. Now, before we get into it, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So, like you said, my name is Steve Hall. I am the owner and co-owner and founder of Revive Stronger, which is this nice little neon light that you have behind me. And we are a online coaching company. So we mostly coach people to kind of gain muscle, lose fat, maybe take it to stage as a kind of bodybuilder and also for photo shoot prep and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where our wheelhouse is. And I guess it's taking mostly those who are like intermediate going on advanced and trying to help them get to that advanced part and really learning their body and what they respond well to, because we don't work with kind of novice beginners. They're more so people who understand the basics absolutely, but to apply it to themselves or to put kind of the principles into a program, they feel less sure about that. So that's kind of the target audience that we kind of lend ourselves to in terms of that. And then we also are a kind of content provider, which is mostly our podcast. So I host the Revive Stronger podcast where I get to interview just like this, kind of people within the industry. And I'm very fortunate to talk to some of the kind of smartest people there that make me feel like an absolute idiot. So it's always nice to learn from them. And then also we have the improvement season leg, which I do alongside Pascal Floor, who is the kind of other co-owner of Revive Stronger. And then I am a competitive bodybuilder myself. So I actually competed last season and managed to do pretty well with the WNBF. I came second at the amateur world finals. So I like to say I was second in the world, but I have to be very honest. I'm not even a pro bodybuilder yet. There are levels to this and I'm managing to slowly build my way up and we'll have to see where I get. And I absolutely love the sport and everything it's done for me and what it can do for other people too. Apart from that, I guess I love my anime. You can see even I've got Grogu behind me as well, so I'm a bit of a nerd with the Star Wars and a dog owner, so she may even try and jump on me with Ada down here. But yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
All right, thanks for the introduction. I never told you, but congrats on being second in the world, as you say.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you.
you're always super humble whenever I talk to you or whenever I listen to your podcast, but it is a huge accomplishment, regardless of whether it's amateur or pro bodybuilding. So well done.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I would say it to my clients, for anyone who can even get to stage is done a fantastic thing because it just takes a lot to get to that point where you are in a position where you're comfortable kind of even being in your own skin in front of judges, let alone even the condition you get to. So, because there's a huge mental battle there too. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, that's a good segue into our topic because you have experienced not only going through fat loss phases and muscle building phases that are maybe, let's call them lifestyle phases. You've also gone to the extremes of contest prep. You've taken people to stage. You've coached lifestyle clients as well. So you have the experience of both the extreme level of the sports of bodybuilding, but also the more lifestyle situations of the everyday clients that we both have. So you're basically the perfect person to talk about massing phases. So let's get started with first question. Let's go with a definition of a massing phase. If somebody asked you, what would you consider to be a massing phase? What would your answer be?
It's a good question. So, yeah, it's like you said, there's many different ways that also it can be confusing for people who are new to the industry because they hear like massing phase, bulking phase, gaining phase. It's like they're kind of all the same thing, but I mean, they're exactly all the same thing. They're just different words for the exact same thing. And they're all underpinned by being in a surplus, I would say. That's kind of the underpinning thing that defines whether or not you're in a mass gaining phase versus maintenance or cutting is kind of we're in an energy surplus. We're not maintaining weight, we're not losing weight, we're actually seeing the scale weight go up. And that underpins kind of a massing phase. I think it makes sense to also consider training within that because you could be in a massing phase, I would say you want to be doing hypertrophy specific training. And that really just means that you're training within a certain proximity to failure. You're training with a certain level of volume and a given rep range. You're not doing like singles or triples very much if you're doing them at all. You're doing more
Hmm.
so like 5+ repetitions, maybe up to the 30 rep range. And you're training close to failure for that as well, for an amount of volume that's going to be stimulating muscle growth. So above like your baseline, just maintenance levels of volume, you're getting into levels of volume that is starting to kind of lead to enough of a stress that the body is going to have to adapt and grow new muscle tissue. So I would say they're the main components. Surplus is the king, like that's the main thing. Like you're going to be gaining weight during a mass phase, but then also thinking of training specificity. If it's kind of a mass gaining phase, you also want to support it by being in a hypertrophy training phase and not like a strength phase or doing CrossFit or kind of doing a marathon training. They just had the London Marathon here, so yeah, that wouldn't be kind of you might mass gain in a surplus, but we're thinking about like muscle tissue mass gaining.
That makes sense. Thanks for explaining. So, if I'm hearing that correctly, you're saying that in a massing phase, from a nutritional standpoint, you're aiming to gain weight, so to be in a caloric surplus, whereas training is specific to hypertrophy, so muscle growth, correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
What are your thoughts on potentially being in a muscle building phase or massing phase, as we're calling it today? Let's stick with massing phase so it's not confusing. What are your thoughts on being at maintenance calories, so not aiming to increase your body weight?
Sure. So I think it is the my basic thoughts are in like complete summary is I think growing muscle, if I was to analogize it, is kind of like cycling uphill. And when we're cycling uphill, it's pretty challenging. Whereas fat loss, pretty easy. Cycling downhill, I would say for most people who are listening to this, fat loss just comes a little bit easier to us being in a calorie deficit. And certainly, if we just remove psychology and we just focus on physiology, it's far easier for the body and it's way more willing to lose fat than it is, especially when you have excessive amounts of fat, which most people do, than it is to build new muscle tissue. In fact, like even trying to lose like a pound of fat in a contest prep scenario is still more tenable than trying to gain like pounds of muscle for an advanced lifter in their training phase. So I always think, especially from a physiological perspective, trying to gain muscles like cycling uphill is way harder than cycling downhill. Fat loss, maintenance, the easiest of all. You're cycling on a flat, super easy. You don't really even need to do anything. You can just like touch the pedal and you kind of move forward. So I think of being at maintenance as kind of almost like having the handbrake on a little bit when we're trying to go up that hill. Whereas we could have an excess of calories and we could kind of cycle freely. We want to make that process as easy as possible because it's such a hard process. So being in a surplus just automatically puts you in more of an anabolic environment. You've got more calories to come in for recovery. You've got more calories to come in for kind of training volume, which is important for muscle growth. So it's anabolic. It's kind of going to help recovery, and it just makes that process so much more predictable and smoother. So being at maintenance just makes the process harder. It's not untenable. It's not impossible. you might spin your wheels for a long, long time and not really know that's the issue. So, especially for someone who's more advanced, I see it as something that is unnecessarily impeding their progress. For someone who's new to lifting, to someone who has lots of excess body fat, especially, and is new to kind of really giving it their all to like specific hypertrophy training and kind of spacing out their protein and making sure they're having enough, like they are almost like it actually can work really nicely for them. They can probably burn some of their excess body fat and also have the ability to grow muscle. But those are quite unique situations. For most people who have been doing this for a long, long time, it's way more predictable to get up that hill by having a surplus there than kind of not giving yourself that extra little bit of an edge. So for me personally, I really doubt I would be at the level of muscularity I am if I hadn't been through these phases. And I always think about who are the people who arguably know the most or have at least practiced the most in terms of gaining as much muscle as possible, and that's bodybuilders. And what to like any bodybuilder who's been, we don't even have to take the Olympia stage, we can just say like the natural bodybuilding stage. They've been in a like they go through these cycles of massing and cutting because it's the most predictable and most likely way to get to that end goal of building a muscular and lean physique. So that's kind of where my head is with maintenance phases. Personally haven't seen much um, in many cases where they've been very successful for that, unless they're a specific individual who can respond well to them because they're in that kind of unique situation where they don't need much of a stimulus to grow. And then we have literature to say that they do work though. So you can't say to grow muscle you must be in a surplus. It's like, well, that's not quite true. It's just probably much harder.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying it's a matter of efficiency. Being in a surplus simply makes the process of gaining muscle more efficient. It's not impossible if you stay at maintenance, it just makes it harder. And the more experienced you are, the slower muscle growth is already going to be. So your argument is, what's the point of making it unnecessarily harder by staying at maintenance? Would that be a correct summary?
Pretty much, yeah. And for that advance, within Chris Bericat's paper, I can remember like they were relatively advanced trainees and they did recomp, but they did so much right. So they had like high protein intakes. They spread their protein throughout the day. They slept really well. They had really good training. And I'm like, man, you're creating such an anabolic environment. If you just had that surplus there, think how much more muscle you would have gained. Yeah, sure, for a little bit of fat, but that fat loss, like going down hills, kind of nice, smooth, easy to take off. Then we can get back to more mass gaining. So yeah, no, your summary was spot on.
Perfect. And actually, you gave me another segue into the next question that I had. You mentioned you can gain a lot of muscle in a surplus and a little bit of fat. So, in that case, you've pretty much answered it already. When we're talking about a caloric surplus, how possible is it to gain exclusively muscle? You hear sometimes people online say that you can make, they call them even lean gains, which in my opinion doesn't really make a lot of sense as a definition, where they're essentially saying this kind of massing phase includes a surplus, but you will gain almost exclusively, if not exclusively, muscle mass with zero fat gain. How do you feel about that? Is that possible? Have you seen that before? What are your thoughts?
I I think it sounds amazing. It's what I used to completely strive for, was this situation where I would have to gain no fat. In the past, that would be clean bulking, and this was through eating only clean food, and so I wouldn't put on any fat because I wasn't eating any like dessert or something like this. Whereas we now know it's like calorie balance is the most important thing. And when you aim for this kind of lean gains, and maybe you aim for like the rate limiting gain of muscle, it's just so implausible in practice because you can't pick and choose what the body's going to do in terms of gaining muscle over fat. We even know this now with like partitioning ratios. We used to think, oh, if you stay leaner, you have a better partitioning ratio, you're going to partition more of that kind of surplus towards muscle tissue versus fat tissue. And now we know actually you can't really do that. Unfortunately, we can't manage partitioning ratios through how lean we are. It's like if you weight train and you are relatively active, you're going to be kind of as good a partitioning ratio as you can really hope for. So I find, yeah, lean gains is one of those things that sounds so appealing, but when you think about it in reality, it's kind of like the same as someone who maybe trains to failure all the time and they add load to the bar. It's like, if you can add load to the bar, 5 pounds forever, you're going to be the strongest person in the world. And it's like the same with if you're able to just gain like a pound of muscle a month, and no added fat, you're slowly getting leaner then, because you're now adding lean tissue without any fats. You're slowly like reducing your body fat percentage. So in that way, you could think, oh man. And I think this is funny because Nikias, I'll talk to people and I'll be like, I'm in contest prep for a bodybuilding show. And if they don't know the sport, they'll be like, oh, so you're trying to like eat and gain muscle, right? Into the show. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to hold on to my muscle and lose all the body fat. It's like, well, if you believe in lean gaining, you could think, man, I'm just going to lean gain into a bodybuilding show because I'll be shredded and I'll gain muscle at the same time. Like, it's because my body fat will just reduce as I'm gaining all this lean tissue. So yeah, it's one of those that I think lures a lot of people in, and I think can be very good for like selling out as a, I don't know, fitness influencer. That sounds really great, but in practice, it's unfortunately the cost of doing business is gaining some of that body fat. There's always, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. I love the saying because it's so
Yeah, me
true in
too.
life. There's nothing for free. You don't get a free dinner. So yeah, there's a reason you see bodybuilders in their off season getting a bit like they don't look like they're on stage because you've got to gain some body fat in that process. So yeah, that's kind of my stance on lean gaining, and that's coming from personal experience as well. Like I, for the longest time, would try and be in this tiny surplus. I for the longest time would eat at maintenance and try and gain muscle, and then I'd be in a tiny surplus. And man, trying to track a pound of body weight over a month, it's almost impossible. And I would just find I'd be so reactive to my intake, and I'd be hyper focused on what I was eating, how I was looking, and I'd forget the biggest driver for hypertrophy after all is training. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, I'm going to gain some fat, but let's make sure I'm in a surplus because it fuels my training the best, and let's focus on the training and not so much focus on how I'm looking. Let's invest in this thing. We can clean up later. So that's kind of, yeah, my stance on lean gaining at least.
Yeah, we agree on that. I believe that there is essentially no way of choosing yourself where the surplus is going to go. You can do your best, which is, in my opinion, you train hard, you train with a specific program for hypertrophy. But other than that, once you're in a surplus, some of that surplus is going to go into your energy store, which is body fat. So sounds like we're on the same page there. Now, as for the next question, then we've been talking about training and nutrition as the two main variables to manipulate. So, in your opinion, which one is most important? You've kind of already alluded to it right now. Is it training or is it nutrition that's more important in a massing phase?
So yeah, this is a great question, and it's funny you did send over the questions. I'm not meaning to answer them as I go along because I haven't got them up or anything. But it's great because you've obviously thought through the subject and how it all flows. So it's very nice. So you're completely right in that. I did allude to it in that I said kind of training is super important. I think it's kind of a bit of a fallacy to say one or the other. It's kind of the same with training. Like people will say, "Oh, volume's the prime driver," or "intensity is the prime driver," and I'm like, you can't really have one without the other. Like you're not growing muscle with all the training volume in the world, but you do one rep and it was really easy. But similarly, you can't kind of do one rep and it be all out failure, and you're not going to grow from that because, well, even to get one rep, it's volume in the first place. So similar with training and nutrition, they kind of need to be synergistic and they go hand in hand. The way I like to think about it is that training is the match that lights the fire for muscle gain. So you've got to have that ignition started. You're never going to light a fire with just you're never going to get a fire started, sorry, with just like the fuel in gas and wood or whatever. It's just not, there's not going to be no fire. But similarly, if you're just striking the fire with all this great training, it's not going to go into something without the kind of surplus there or the nutrition there to fuel it. So I think about nutrition as permissive to whatever you're doing within the gym. And so if you're lighting that match through specific hypertrophy style training that we've kind of touched on some points there, then the nutrition then comes in to fuel that moving forward. Because like I said, even parts of nutrition help the training process in terms of recovery, in terms of the amount of volume there we can do. So they kind of go hand in hand. And I couldn't say one is more important than the other. I would say you need to have an element of focus on both. And I would say if you're going to focus on one first, get the training sorted, and then the nutritional part is just going to be so complementary to all of that process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's also rather intuitive if you think about it. If we were in a surplus but we weren't training at all, most of that surplus would go into our body fat stores. At the same time, as you said, and I completely agree on that view as well, training is the driver of hypertrophy. However, as you were saying just a few minutes ago, if we don't have that surplus that enables muscle growth to be more efficient, and also the nutrition in general being supportive of muscle growth and recovery as well, then we're not going to see as much progress in a muscle building phase. So then let's stick with training for a little while then. And we talked about how it needs to be specific to hypertrophy, which is the process of muscle growth. And I'm wondering, which are the variables that you focus the most on when it comes to training?
Cool. So I sort of like to think about it in a principled manner. So I guess that would start with like specificity overall. And
Hmm.
I guess the variables that we focus most on are kind of training frequency, volume, intensity, and relative intensity. But then there's more kind of nuanced things, and it's difficult. In some ways, I think they can be more nuanced, and in some ways, I think they're very important if you don't have a basic understanding in terms of like exercise selection. I think as long
Hmm.
as you have a decent baseline of exercise selection, you don't need to focus on it a huge amount until later on. But if you don't even have the basics down, like you say to someone squat and they're squatting on a Boso ball, you're like, oh damn, that's no longer hypertrophy specific. That's going to be really challenging to stabilize and overload those muscles that you're trying to actually achieve growth in. It's just going to be challenging a lot of stabilizers. So yeah, when I think about these variables, if we start out with kind of volume,
Hmm.
so I like to use the volume landmarks put out by Renaissance Periodization and principally Mike Israetel. And the way I like to look at those is through we want to meet that threshold at least of minimum effective volume. If we aren't achieving that kind of volume threshold, then we can't be sure we're growing. And then anything above that is great and a bonus, and maybe we're in maximal adaptive volume. So this is the most volume we can do and recover from and adapt to. Sorry, not recover from. And then we get to MRV, which is your max recoverable volume. So this is the most volume you can do. You could only repeat that level of volume week on week, and then you'd kind of start seeing diminishing returns after that, and you'd see drops in performance. So probably want to deload at that point. So fatigue management comes into this as well. Even fatigue management comes in through rest days and how you use kind of relative intensity as well. But so in terms of volume, we also have the kind of literature that's out there at the moment. I think the latest, I actually don't know if it's the latest, but I know kind of a lot of the meta-analyses, systematic reviews that are looking at levels of volume that achieve decent amounts of growth that we would maybe term that minimum effective tends to be about 8 to 12 sets per muscle group per week. So that could be like you're doing 4 sets of squats one day, 4 sets of leg press one day, and that might be for you the minimum effective volume you need for your legs to grow. And then there tends to be maybe up to like 20. Some trainees have done way more than 20 and seen really good growth, but maybe for the average trainee, like 20 sets per muscle group per week. And that's like your MRV sort of range that you might fall within. And so you might on average do like 15 sets somewhere around there for your muscle group per week. And that's including for your biceps, for example, if you're doing lots of rowing and pulling and pull-ups and things, those would all count towards your bicep volume. In general, that's kind of what the literature would say is like any synergistic muscle groups also count within that. So if you do 2 sets of triceps at the end of your push session, but you've already done 8 sets for chest, that's like basically 10 sets for your triceps, which kind of lands within those kind of recommendations for minimum effective volume. And that's where I like to start people. And so if I have a client who comes to me and they've been training a while and they have a good understanding of where that level is for them, then great, I can start with them and then I can kind of auto regulate their training volume through a mesocycle. And we can do that through various means of kind of looking at their performance, their recovery, and we can get a gauge of kind of, oh, are you recovering on time for your next session? Or are you still holding on to fatigue or soreness within that session? When you're training for that muscle group, you getting like a decent kind of pump within the muscle group? Are you getting a decent amount of disruption? Does it feel fatigued and tired during that session? And when you leave, do you feel like you've got a good workout for that muscle group? I can use some of those variables to give me an understanding of where their volume should be. And the most important one though is like, are you progressing session to session? If you are, amazing. If you then you're ticking the box of I feel like in this session I'm getting a great stimulus within that muscle group, amazing. And if you're recovering on time, you're probably in that kind of really good zone for training volume where you can just kind of milk that out for as long as possible and just look to make things harder over the weeks. And I guess that brings me to kind of relative intensity in terms of making things harder. I like to meet a threshold there as well. So that week kind of starting their mesocycle or starting their training period, we're looking to meet at least 4 reps in reserve. So we're training as hard as so we have 4 reps left in the tank. So if we could have done a set of 14, we've done a set of 10 instead of that. So we have nice 4 reps in reserve, maybe 3. It doesn't need to be perfect at this point. For some people who have no kind of awareness of reps in reserve, I'm just like, right, train to the point of which it gets really quite challenging, and maybe a rep slows down and you're unsure how many reps you really have left. As long as we've kind of met that kind of hard training from that week one, then from there on, I'm just like, right, let's just look to add maybe a rep or a small amount of load. That might be 2 to 3% additional load to match reps, or it might be an extra rep and match the same load. And so every week we're looking to make things, we're overloading from week one. So that gets that kind of principle of overload. We've got sufficient volume because we've met minimum effective volume, and we've got sufficient relative intensity. We've met our like minimum threshold of 3 to 4 RER. And then we're progressively overloading through them as a cycle by using additions in reps or a small amount of load. And we're auto regulating set volume through that in session stimulus and kind of um, readiness rating kind of session to session. So we know we're in like a really good ballpark of training. And then eventually, like you're going to get to the point where you're like, I can't add a rep, I can't add any load, I'm at my limit, and the training volume is pretty high. I feel pretty fatigued. Maybe your sleep's not so good, your appetite has changed. You kind of feel like you don't want to go train. You get to this point maybe after, it could be anywhere from 4 to like 8 weeks, where you've just done this kind of progressive overload and things have felt really good. And you just get to this point where you're like, nah. So then we enter that kind of deload week where it's really pull back the volume, really pull back the intensity. It's easy training really for that week. It might feel kind of hard because you don't want to be there, you don't want to do it. And that allows us to drop a lot of fatigue so we can come in again and do this cycle of hard training where we're in this kind of growth zone, which is really, really productive. Another thing I'll look at, as I mentioned, is exercise selection. So I think, again, if you have a basic understanding of, we're trying to pick exercises that work the muscles functions and we're nice and stable, and you can just look at a lot of the traditional exercises, not that you can always do this, but look at what bodybuilders have done over the like course of history. And it's like, they have a squat pattern, they have like a hip hinge pattern, they do like leg extension, leg curl, they do some rowing, some pulling, they do some bicep curl, they do some tricep push downs, they have lateral raises for their delts, they do calf work. Like they're training the muscle groups through exercises that train them very well. But we can probably improve that by being a bit more individualized to the person, because there's enough people out there, you probably found them, Nikias, who can't squat. Like it just feels terrible
Yep.
for them. So to tell them, well, look at Tom Platz, he had the biggest squat, like he had huge quads, whatever. And you've like, but I don't look like Tom Platz. Like I've squat for ages. So, well, you're not built like Tom. He's built very differently to you. So you might not be able to get a great stimulus from that movement. So then maybe you try them and move them to a different squat pattern, like a hack squat. And you can individualize via their feedback of, where do you feel kind of the tension, the burn, the stretch, and how does it feel on your joints, tendons, ligaments? Does it feel like you come off and after you've done a set, you're like, wow, my quads feel amazing and I barely feel beat up? That's a great exercise. But if you come out of it, you're like, I don't really know where I feel it. I just feel really tired and man, I just want to go home. That's probably not the best exercise. And that isn't to say pick easy exercises, because a hack squat is still tremendously hard. You're just making sure it's hard in the right areas for the quads and not for kind of the joints, ligaments, and maybe other muscle groups that you're not trying to train. So you can kind of individualize training through this, what Mike Israel would call stimulus to fatigue ratio. So you're trying to maximize the stimulus side for a decent fatigue trade-off, because again, like hack squats, they're not the easiest exercise. Leg extensions are much easier. But you can't just do tons of leg extensions and expect your quads to go really, really well, because like one, that doesn't train the quad through all of its functions, and two, it's just the stimulus side is quite lacking, so it's just not very efficient. So you kind of want to find these complementary exercises within your program that's going to really, really help you grow and develop that kind of mind muscle connection with them, and focus on like these little exercise cues that you can find that just work for your body really well. And like I said at the start, when I talk about these kind of intermediate going on advanced trainees, this is where I try and get them to, where they're like, they're listening to the feedback of what their body's giving them, so they can find that volume that works really well for them, and they can find those exercises that work really well for them, and that technique specifically that works really well for them, because those are some of the things the training literature and the scientific literature can never tell us. We're all individuals, so we can get averages from all of that when we can get some anecdotes from other people. We have to go into the gym ourselves and do these things to know and experiment what works really well for us within the gym. So, and then I guess the only other one to cover, and I might have forgotten some, but I think I went over volume, I went over relative intensity at least. If we talk about absolute intensity, I mentioned not doing less than 5 reps generally makes most sense. I find less than 5 reps, there's just not sufficient, like the stimulus to fatigue ratio of those is quite poor. And we also, if we're trying to leave like 3 to 4 reps in reserve on less than a 5 rep set, it kind of gets a bit difficult to do so and a little bit confusing for a lot of people. But basically, if you do less than 5 reps, the stimulus to fatigue ratio starts to drop off quite heavily. The study with Brad Schoenfeld where they had like I forget the exact protocol, but they kind of matched volume and they had one group doing much heavier weights and they had to do way more sets to get the same number of hard sets. And the other group did lighter weights but matched. And the other group they grew the same, but the other group felt really able to they could do way more, whereas the powerlifters were like completely trashed. So it kind of is quite telling to the stimulus fatigue ratio of rep ranges where like after that like 5, it's probably as low as you want to go. And there is literature to support all the way up to 30 repetitions, nice and far away from even with some reps in reserve, works pretty darn well. I do find much past 20 reps for some exercises comes pretty untenable. Just like less than 10 reps for like a lateral raise, for example, becomes quite untenable. So it's nice to have this range of rep ranges, and you can kind of be a bit synergistic with the rep ranges you choose for particular exercises. Like that squat and leg extension example, you might pick like a 5 to 15 rep range is great for a hack squat. More than 15 reps on a hack squat starts to sound a bit like jogging on the spot type of deal. Starts to become quite cardiovascularly difficult. But less than 10 reps on like a leg extension, I imagine most people struggle to sit in the seat and they just feel it all in their joints and things like this. So definitely like 10, maybe all the way up to 30 reps for like a leg extension. I could see that being kind of something that could be quite productive for people. I do tend to find 10 to 20 reps is like the jackpot for most people, where probably you're going to spend most of your time in and around that point. So that's kind of absolute intensity. I talk about it in rep ranges because that's the most practical within the gym versus like percentage of 1 rep max. It's just quite challenging to do that. And so rep ranges work really nicely. We talked about relative intensity and kind of the overload threshold there. So we know we have to be at least at 3 or 4 RAR probably. We might be able to train further from failure for like some lifts, but I think practically it's so hard to assess. Even 3 to 4 RAR can be quite challenging for people. So leaving even more, I think practically doesn't make much sense. I'm not sure the stimulus fatigue ratio trade off would be worth it at that point either. And then when I talk about training frequency, really we know if volume is matched in terms of number of hard sets, so number of sets close to failure for a muscle group, tends to see equivocal kind of results in terms of hypertrophy. But we've also found that if you start pushing set volume up much past like 10 sets for a muscle group in one session, so you think 5 sets bench press, 5 sets of flies, if you start trying to add more on top of that, you probably just start creating more damage and fatigue and not growing more. So maybe if you're in that scenario, you want to start splitting that up. So if you're finding you need more than 10 sets for a muscle group in a week to grow at your best, split it between twos kind of makes sense. So they do find probably for hypertrophy 2 times per week tends to beat out 1 times per week, especially for people who need reasonable amounts of volume, which is going to be most people. Much past 2, the literature is kind of mixed. It's like you can kind of go up or down, and it doesn't really matter so much. So I like people to experiment at that point. Try lower frequencies, try higher frequencies, and especially if you're in like that 10 to 20 ballpark range, like 2 times a week is going to work for you. But equally, you could split that up to 4 times a week if you wanted to. That could be 4 sessions of 5 sets. Maybe you find you get a better stimulus fatigue ratio and better results that way. It's probably going to be quite similar, and that's maybe something you can periodize as well throughout your training. Some muscle groups I find I can get like a great stimulus for them from just like 3 sets or something. So I'm like, oh, I could do that many times a week. Whereas some, I'm like, I need like 7, 8 to start feeling like I've really got a good session stimulus. So I probably can't do that 4 times a week. It's going to lead to my volume to be potentially way too high. So I think that's something you can definitely experiment with in terms of training frequency. But normally for most people, anything from 2 up to 4 times a week is probably going to work the best. I generally find in my experience. I think that covers most of training.
I was going to say, Steve, thank you for the super comprehensive answer. Now, of all of the training variables that we can manipulate, it sounds like in order to make the program as specific as possible to our goal of increasing muscle mass, what the big rocks that you have mentioned for you are volume, relative intensity, so how close to failure you take every single set, and exercise selection. And then all of the other variables we talked about, frequency, absolute intensity, essentially the load on the bar or the number of reps you can do per set, provided it's at least 5 per set. It sounds like these other variables are important, but secondary. They kind of work in synergy with the first three big rocks, but they serve them more so than being as important. Would that be an accurate summary? As in, I'm saying, as long as our volume is appropriate for growth, our intensity of effort or relative intensity is appropriate, close enough to failure, as you were saying, and our exercise selection works for our body relative to the muscles we're trying to train, then frequency and how many reps we do serve these initial three principles, but they're not necessarily as important to worry about. Would that be correct? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, in general, I would just say, with the reps, I probably wouldn't be comfortable anyone going above 30 or
Yeah,
much above 30. I'd start to find that to be, I think we actually have research up to like, I think it might be 30% of your one rep max or something like this. But it just starts to become crazy impractical for a lot of people. Like, I don't know, you might just switch off like towards the end. Are you really at failure, or are you just at like mental failure?
yeah.
But yeah, I think the rest there spot on.
Perfect. So, yeah, I find that getting far above 20, unless you're going, yeah, as you say, it's hard enough to gauge if your muscles are failing, like if you're experiencing local failure or if it's your brain just switching off. If you then try to leave reps in reserve, we even have literature showing that the more reps we do, the harder it becomes to gauge reps in reserve or RIR. So I agree with you there. 5 to 20, maybe 25 reps for some exercises like lateral raises, but far above that, the set starts taking 2 minutes, and then you're like, all right, what am I doing here? Am I running on a treadmill or am I lifting weights?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Yeah, it just becomes very impractical when you start getting up there and you question and doubt yourself, and it's not worth it's not worth the effort. I think 25 is plenty high enough for most people. But by all means, like I would say, people can experiment. These are the sort of things, like if you've never done it before, might be the thing you're missing. You might be like, wow, this suddenly is giving me something that I never thought I would have got before. But
Yeah, that's fair enough. Okay, we talked a lot about training, so let's pivot and touch upon nutrition. Just like similar to the previous question, in terms of nutrition, what are the big rocks that you want in place for a successful massing phase?
cool. So definitely start with calories, as kind of the first thing that I would look at for someone. That's gonna, like I said, that's like the underlying feature of a massing phase is being in a surplus. So I definitely want to make sure that someone is in a surplus, and I tend to end up putting most people in about a 300 calorie surplus. But I'm not worried about if it's 300, 400, or whatever it is. What I'm trying to view is how's their weight trending over time. So I want them to be gaining, and I won't necessarily always look on a week to week basis, but most people talk about it on a week to week basis. Is I like to get people to gain anywhere from 0.25 to 0.5% of their body weight on a week to week basis. Practically, I normally would look on a 2 week basis because muscle growth is slow, you see fluctuations, and it's not like someone's suddenly like, I don't know, falling out of a surplus within a week. It's not like if you're in a 300 calorie surplus, it's not like in 1 week you can adapt to that. You're going to see the rate of gain kind of slow down over weeks. So it could just be a one-off fluctuation, or they maintain for 1 week and then they spike up the next week or something. So I like to look over maybe like a 2 week period for most people. So that ends up being anywhere from 0.5 to 1% of additional weight gain per week. And that's kind of dictating the surplus. Because again, if I give them a 300 calorie surplus and then they just don't start gaining, then I'm like, right, I need to actually push this higher. Some people adapt very, very quickly. So I think when I tell people practically, I'd never say put them in 300 calorie surplus, because it could suddenly not be a 300 calorie surplus. So gauging that off body weight trends and averages, I think works really, really nicely. So that's essentially calories. And then I would look at kind of macronutrient breakdown, and most importantly, start with protein. So there's many ways you can set protein. I find for most people, it works really nicely to just set them about a gram per pound. It generally just works really nicely for most situations for most people. Um, the only issue tend to sometimes find is for people who have like really high carbohydrate intakes, they end up seeing lots of, I don't know, a bagel has 10 grams of protein. It's just like if they eat 4 bagels through the day, they're getting 40 grams of protein that's like not got a full amino acid profile, and so it's not going to be having the same impact as if they had 40 grams of protein from like a chicken breast. That's going to promote muscle protein synthesis way more. So for people with high carbohydrate intakes, I maybe bump that up a little bit higher. I tend to find, I did this calculation ages ago, for your average carbohydrate source per 100 grams, there's about 20 grams of protein. So when I look at that, I'm like, well, I'm not going to just ignore that 20 grams. It still kind of attributes to our protein intake, but maybe I'll half it because maybe it's missing half the amino acids that I'm wanting, or maybe I'm being a bit overzealous there and it's not quite half. But I basically am like, so there's 10 grams of protein going missing here that I'm like, I want to make up for that. So I tend to add about 10 grams of additional protein on top of that 1 gram per pound for every 100 grams of carbohydrates, assuming they're on quite high intakes. If you're on like 200 grams of carbs, it's not worth stressing about. But if you're on 3, 4, 5, 600 grams, you start just eating so many carbohydrates. You're just like, my meal is made up of a tiny little piece of chicken and like 4 bagels. I'm like, right, we better introduce some more actual like higher quality or full amino acid profile proteins in there. So that's where I look at protein in terms of macros, and then I tend to set fat after that, and I tend to set that, and I don't know why I end up doing this, but I set it in a really strange way. I need to work out what the calculation is, but in for most experts and what I found for most people, and I say this because there's not much literature to support what's the lower amount of fat that we can tolerate and feel fine at. So most people settle around zero point 0.3 per pound to be like the lower end of where if you go below that, you might be missing out on some essential fatty acids that we're going to be getting, some kind of minerals that we're getting from some, sorry, micronutrients that we're getting from some fats, and also for like hormone production and things like this. So we can't be certain you can live off less than zero point 0.3 grams per pound long term and be healthy and productive. So I tend to set that as my lower end. And then the reason I say I don't know why I do this is that I set it at 1 gram per kilo as the higher end. And it's because I've never done the conversion. But I tend to find that that's a nice upper limit for most people. If people are going much more than 1 gram per kilo, I tend to find that they're just ending up eating quite a lot of lower quality foods, I would say, where it's lower micronutrients, and they're getting a lot of like saturated fats because now they're moving towards more things like pastries, fried foods, lots of cheese, like fatty cuts of meat, and just the quality of their diet is going down. So I like to keep that as their upper cap. And I also do that because I think there is some decent rationale to suggest that carbohydrates are going to be doing more for us during our mass gaining phases than what fats are. Fats are really just once you've met the minimum. I'm not sure what going above that minimum is really doing to benefit us much more, apart from extra calories to serve for the kind of surplus that we need. Whereas carbohydrates, I think more tends to be better. So if we can prioritize our carbohydrate intake by kind of having this kind of lower and upper cap to our fats, I kind of fill up the rest with carbohydrates, which can lead to quite high carbohydrate intakes for some people when they're on like 4,000 calories and they're not a huge individual. So, and the reason for that is because carbohydrates, whilst not conditionally, sorry, not like an essential macronutrient in terms of fats and protein, absolutely are, which is why they're set first. Carbohydrates are more set by kind of the rest of your energy expenditure. But carbohydrates are going to be the things that are fueling performance the most. They're the thing that's going to be recovering us the most. So again, that leads into that kind of the more volume we can do and recover from, it tends to lead to more growth. So I'm kind of on that side of, okay, if we can have more carbs and that lets us do more volume in the gym, maybe we get a bit more growth by biasing our carbohydrates like that. And then also carbohydrates, when we eat them, we do get an insulin response. And there is, like, I guess, bodybuilders on PEDs, and they're taking they take insulin for a reason because it tends to be anti-catabolic and kind of anabolic in that way. Now, the amount of insulin we get, I think, is pitifully low from this amount. But if it can do anything, I'm kind of like going for that 1% of maybe. However, I'm not strict to this. So if someone is like, Steve, can we just do protein and calories? And I kind of just want to switch off to my fat and carbohydrates. I'm like, no, we have to stick to this kind of higher carbohydrate model because it's obviously way superior. It's nothing that's been kind of, it's not a particularly evidence-based suggestion. It's just kind of more of a theoretical, mechanistic kind of based suggestion. And also in my experience, like I said, people's food quality tends to go, they just tend to use it as an excuse to eat lots of ice cream and stuff like this when they let their fats go too high. Whereas keeping their fats capped, I just tend to find people make better food decisions. So then after macronutrients, I go to nutrient timing. And food composition, they're kind of side by side. For body composition, you probably argue nutrient timing is more important. And the most important part of that, and I keep this really simple, is we want to spread that protein through anywhere from probably for most people 3 to 6, with the sweet spot probably 4 to 5. I find most people land at 4 to 5 because 6 is just like, I don't know, you're eating all the time. And 3 is, I mean, could work for some people, but maybe they're 3 in a protein shake. And that tends to work really nicely for people. So the reason we're doing that is because we want to make sure to maximize muscle protein synthesis as many times through the day as possible. And again, that should theoretically lead to more growth for us. Whereas if we eat all of our protein like an intermittent faster in one meal, we kind of maximized it for a number of hours and then we've got like nothing. And it's like, well, we're probably better off maximizing it, letting it come down, and then maximizing it again through the day. So over the long term, we're kind of providing as much of a growth stimulus as possible. And muscle protein synthesis is basically muscle growth, synthesizing muscle protein. And then carbohydrate timing is mostly just look to try and bias your carbohydrates around your workout window. I'm not obsessed about certain percentages or amounts. Just try and bias them there, because that again, you're going to top off glycogen stores. Hopefully that would help performance, and then you're going to replenish them when you're in a really insulin sensitive state as well after a training workout. That should promote slightly better results and recovery. Again, it's not a big deal though. So as long as your training is really good, I can't argue against it and you're seeing good results. But for those more advanced individuals, this is going to make a difference probably for them. Or maybe if you're in a, well, we're in a massing scenario, so you're not likely in a low glycogen state at any particular point, but it's probably slightly better that way. And then fats, I just try and make sure there's not a lot of fat around the workout window, mostly for digestion, because if you eat, I don't know, a ton of fat and that just slows things down, tend to not feel so good in your training session. So I try and just keep that away from the workout window. But really, fats can just like be spread through as to your preference. The only additional concern I have there is there is a little bit of literature support, and this is again some of those small things with chrononutrition, whereby we're a bit more insulin sensitive in the start of the day versus the night and in the evening. And so we might partition things slightly better if we have more of our food earlier versus later. But the main thing is I find I really don't want people to save loads of calories pre-bed, because it just leads to really poor sleep, because they just get hot, sweaty, and they're doing that digestive stressful process during their sleep. I used to do it, and I wonder why I wake up tired, not feeling great. So I try and kind of reduce the food a little bit towards nighttime if possible. That's most of it for nutrient timing. And then food composition is as simple as majority of your food coming from minimally processed, wholesome, kind of lots of fruit and veg in your diet, kind of the stuff that we all know is kind of quote unquote good, healthy, kind of micronutrient dense food. And then like 20% if you want to have from discretionary food. I don't think that's going to meaningfully impact results in any sort of negative way. So if you want to have that bowl of ice cream at the end of the day, have at it, so long as the majority of your day has been really wholesome and productive food. I think you're in a really, really good spot there. And that tends to lead to like 25 grams plus of fiber. That tends to lead to at least 5 combined fruit and veg. Once you've got those two like baseline things, you've hit a lot of your basics, and so you're in a really good place. And then the final thing would just be supplementation, which there's not too much we can do there, Nikias. It's basically get your health supplements in place, which probably needed individualizing to some point, but maybe it's omega-3s if you're not having any fatty fish or salmon, and things like this. And then maybe a vitamin D if you're not spending much time outside, or it's kind of it's the winter time for you. And then there's things like you could look into magnesium, zinc. Lots of athletes tend to be a bit low on those, so I tend to like people to supplement with those, or at least I suggest it. And then on this kind of ergogenic side, it's maybe we do some caffeine pre-workout. We can do some creatine each day, creatine monohydrate that can support performance. And outside of that, I'm not sure if there's particularly anything else I tend to recommend to people, apart from if people are thinking protein powders and things like this, and like carbohydrate powders. But I tend to view those in food comp versus, because they're basically just food at the end of the day. Sorry, I ended up just going through everything, but that's how I take calories all the way up to supplementation. And yeah, that's the route to go down for mass gaining.
Don't apologize for giving me the answer that I asked for to
Yeah.
begin with. No, that was another super comprehensive answer. I just want to make sure that to give a quick recap so everybody's on the same page. So it sounds like calories are dependent on the rate of weight gain that you're aiming for, and you aim for about 1 to 2% of body weight gain per month. So the surplus is predicated on that. Protein about a gram per pound of body weight per day sounds like is the rule of thumb that you go by. Fats, a minimum of zero point 0.3 grams per pound per day. It tends to sort everybody as far as your experience goes. And then you like to cap it at 1 gram per kilogram per
I need
day,
to convert that to pounds.
which I believe would be about zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.6 grams per pound per
Yeah.
day. And you like that not for any scientific reasons necessarily, but simply because it seems to help people make more health conscious choices with their food selection. And these are the big rocks, and then whatever is left of calories you like to assign to carbohydrates, maybe bumping up the protein by 10 grams per 100 grams of carbohydrates consumed. And these are the most important rocks, keep calling them the big rocks. And then you like to distribute protein across 3 to 6 meals per day to eat the healthful food that we all know is good for us for the main part. And and that's and then supplementation is, as you said, individualized to the clients, with creatine probably being the most scientifically backed supplement that's exclusively for sports performance, although it seems like it does have some cognitive benefits as well in addition to that. Would that be an accurate summary there? Have I missed out on anything?
Yeah, you nailed it. I think it was Martin McDonald or someone like that who was like sprinkling creatine on their like baby's food because of the benefits outside of just sports performance. It's creatine. It's like, what doesn't creatine do? It's kind of coming to that point. So
Actually, I'm doing MNU. I signed up, I enrolled this year, and I think he did say something like that. So I think you're right that
amazing.
it was Martin. All right. So we talked about training and nutrition as the most important variables for a successful massing phase. Now, in the last 10 minutes, and then I'll let you go, I just wanted to consider something that you mentioned at the very beginning, which is, I think, underrated sometimes, but very important, which is the process of recovery from training. So could you cover if you have any if you recommendations on principles or variables outside of nutrition and training to optimize recovery and make sure that we are again, yes, recovering from training, because as far as I understand it, you are not going to grow from what you can't recover from. So if recovery isn't in place and isn't optimized to the individual, let's say, so it's specific to each person, it's as good as it can be for that person, then we're not going to make as many gains as we could. First of all, would you agree with that view? And secondarily, what would be your recommendations then for recovery?
I would definitely agree. There's a I don't know where this quote comes from, but it stress is stress is stress. Is essentially just saying like it doesn't matter if it's. I think a lot. This is where I used to view it. I used to view training stress as training stress, lifestyle stress is lifestyle stress, whatever. So if I was having a really busy period and loads of exams and very stressed and I'm not getting much sleep, I think, oh, that won't impact my training because that's that stress. That's not my training stress. But stress is stress is stress. It impacts everything. The body doesn't really differentiate between what the stress where it's coming from. And I think it's Hans Seil. I think it's his book Stress of Life. I have it over there. I think that he wrote that book, but it's a really interesting read because it kind of goes into how he learned about stress and the stress response that we go through. And so you just begin to respect like stress for what it is. And it's not to say stress is always bad because obviously training is stress, but it has to be kind of in the moment you're damaging muscle, but then you've got to repair it to be able to come in and damage it again. So yeah, you're completely right. It is like such an important part of it all. And I would say outside of kind of nutrition and training, the biggest thing, and I would actually I look at this, I used to look at kind of yeah, no. The biggest thing is the foundation to your training, the foundation to your nutrition, I would say is sleep is underneath all of that. That is going to help everything else above there because like if you have good quality sleep, you actually your nutritional partitioning is improved. So we talked about how can you improve like insulin sensitivity or anything like that. So actually good sleep promotes it in the right way. Bad sleep unfortunately pushes it the wrong way. And then in terms of like max recovery volume and like adaptive volumes, again, good sleep is going to allow you to do more, train more. So you should be more productive. So sleep is like the holy grail, underwriting everything. And I think a lot of bodybuilders, and me included, would look towards someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he'd be like, sleep is for the weak, like I don't need to sleep, these sort of things. And so that would make people think that we, like, oh, I don't need to sleep, it's not an important variable, but it's just become so important. I mean, the studies looking at even sleep extension studies in like basketball players, and they just see everything improve with their game. And it's just like, wow, like this is something that people just hadn't been really taking too much notice of. So I would say sleep is so ultimately fundamental. And the way I try to like look at it for clients is give yourself an 8-hour unnegotiable sleeping window in bed. Most of us tend to need at least like 7, 8 hours of sleep to kind of be recovered and well. And when I think about it, for kind of us guys, we're not athletes. We're not putting ourselves through as much as like an endurance runner or someone who's like an Olympic lifter lifting multiple times a day. But we're not your average person. So the studies that these are done on generally are probably going to be average people. So we probably even need more sleep than a lot of these people. We probably benefit from sleep extension. I think I probably would. I don't know about you, Nikis, but sometimes I'm like, I want to sleep more, but I need to do stuff and get on with my day. And
Oh,
it's like,
absolutely.
yeah. So I'm like, oh man, I should just like give myself an extra half an hour here or there. But it's hard to do it because when you're awake, you feel like you're doing things. But ultimately, yeah, sleep is such a foundational thing. So I like that 8 hours, and I'll see it with clients all the time. Like if they've had a poor night's sleep or multiple nights of poor sleep, their training performance will just plummet, and we might have to deload early. And so it's such a fundamental way of coming managing their fatigue in the best way and allowing them to perform at their best. Outside of sleep, it would be just stress management in general. So I talked about like exams. You might get all the best sleep in the world, but if you've got exams on at the moment, they're inherently very stressful. If you've got a job interview, or if you're moving house, or you know your wife has just given birth and it's like your firstborn, like it's going to be incredibly stressful. It might impact the sleep side too, and for some instances, but that's just going to take a lot of mental energy as well. Whereas if you can live your day like day to day, you have a really good structure, you have a really good like I don't know, like you schedule things through your day, and things don't pop out of you and they're like super stressful. You're quite a chill general person, and in fact, meditation could be called evidence based now because there's research showing how great that can be for people's well-being. And so if you can even have like something like meditation, or at least go for a walk outside and maybe get some of your vitamin D at the same time, it can be a really great thing for you, especially in nature. Like all these things are coming out. So I think again, the bodybuilders are starting to learn how important this stuff is, but it's kind of a little bit counter to everything they know, in that it's like push harder, like it should be hard, I should feel like rubbish, blah blah blah. But it's like at times, just like we need to deload from our training, like we need to have this time to pull back and recover and grow, because we're not doing that in the gym, we're doing it outside of the gym. And I mean, you only need like, I think sleep is the time when growth hormone is its highest. So for a natural athlete, it's like you don't get to inject this shit, so you got to take it at night when you're asleep. So yeah, sleep and kind of good quality and quantity of sleep. And this, like, you don't need all the special gadgets to tell you this. You can wake up and know if you're well rested. You know if you need coffee to get through your day. You know if you need a nap in the middle of the day or not. Like, you know if you're getting decent sleep in that regard. And the body's very good at taking it if you give it a good kind of environment to do so. So if you look up good sleep hygiene practices, and then yeah, stress outside of that, some of that's manageable, some of it's not. Some of it's just like having a stoic mindset, just kind of focusing on what you can control and not stressing about things you can't. Because I know I used to just stress about everything, and then I tried to be a bit more stoic, a bit more kind of calm, and I'd be like, right, I can't control what's happening over here. I can only control what I'm doing here. No point thinking about that right now. But it's some people are a bit more stressy than others, so it's you just have to do your best.
That makes sense. So it sounds like for recovery, you primarily advise sleep, enough good quality sleep per night, and stress management strategies, which is also what I recommend my clients. In fact, I bang on about sleep all the time, and
Yeah,
I'm going to add a link to an article I wrote that's a comprehensive guide on sleep, just so that everybody can take a look at that. And that's actually a good segue into the conclusion of this chat, because you talked You gave so much value today to the audience, and it was a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you very much for that. And we talked about the fundamentals. So if you didn't completely dislike my company, I'd like you to come back on to talk about some of the nuances of massing in the future. But before I let you go, can you tell the audience where to find you, where to find Revive Stronger, where to find your content, and basically anything you want to plug? This is your time.
For sure. Yeah, no, it was a pleasure, and I'll definitely be back on to talk about some of those more nuanced things. They're definitely very interesting. And like I said, for the more advanced individual, they start to become more and more important. So, yeah, if they want to find out more about me personally, I'm on Instagram most readily at Revive Stronger. They can
Mhm.
find that content there. And then our website is revivestronger.com. So if they want to look into any of our coaching, they can find that. They can also find the podcast, or they can go on to like Spotify or onto YouTube. They're the main podcast platforms that we're on, and they can search the Revive Stronger podcast, and that will all be there. But that's the main places. If you search Revive Stronger basically anywhere, I'll probably pop up my ugly mug somewhere, and you'll be able to learn more about us. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. And I'll add all of the links in the show notes. So if anybody listening wants to look into Steve and the amazing Revive Stronger team, I've been personally following them, their content. I had some coaching with Pascal last year as well. I've been basically fanboying about you guys for since 2019, and you're doing an amazing job in the industry, inspiring not only athletes and bodybuilders, but I think also coaches, because I've been coaching since 2019. And I think with the standard that you set, you are an inspiration for me, for instance, in doing better in for the people that we serve. So thank you very much for all the work you do, and we'll speak again next time. Thank you very much, as always, for tuning in. I hope that you found this podcast as informative and educational as I was hoping for. Steve was an incredible guest. I'm sure that we all agree. You find all of the links to his website and his Instagram in the description. You find a link to my blog article, A Comprehensive Guide to Sleep for Muscle Growth, in the description as well, along with all of the usual links to my one-on-one coaching service, the waiting list for my online group coaching program, as well as my website, my Instagram, and all of the other ways that you can get in touch with me. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.